VOD, I think we've been told. But yeah, this is episode 3 of The Accused. We'll be discussing the Murdaugh trial, everything that happened today. Fun little pro tip, if you are watching from Instagram, we'll actually be doing a fundraiser today through our Instagram Live for the Rainy Day Fund. 100% of donations will go to that nonprofit. It is local to South Carolina, even to Columbia, correct?
That's right. They're a bunch of friends of ours, and the nonprofit is really to help people that are getting back on their feet after maybe having a conviction, and they're looking for a job, or they're looking for they're trying to get a job, but they don't have a driver's license, so they can't drive their vehicle to the job, but they don't have any money because they've been incarcerated. So the Rainy Day Fund is a great nonprofit by a bunch of good lawyers that practice mostly indigent defense work, and they help people with the small little fees, and that are basically focusing on housing and job-related money to help people kind of get through that gap period and really get back up on their feet. So they're great people, and we'll be happy to always support them. So if you feel like donating, please do that.
Yes. Also, I will be following along live on the live TikTok streaming. So if you do have questions, go ahead and drop them on our TikTok, and some will be answered live time, and then some we may hold till the end if we want to go maybe more in depth. But we'll just go ahead and get started, kind of kick things off today, starting first with Mark Ball.
Yeah, and we'll start with the witnesses, and just for any new viewers, I think we had 3,000 or so last night. Any new viewers, so we are twins. I'm Brian Sheely. This is Luke Sheely. We're identical twins.
Otherwise known as Good Sheely, Bad Sheely.
Good Sheely.
Honorable Casey Manning.
All right, so you're the bad Sheely, I'm the good Sheely. But we're trial lawyers here in Columbia, South Carolina. We tried murder cases, death penalty cases. We recently tried a double murder in front of Judge Newman. We're very familiar with all the players in the Alex Murdaugh case, and so our pod today will be focusing a continued focus on the trial, but as we move forward, the accused pod will focus on other trials throughout the nation and other issues trial related that are of importance to us. But I think we can get started. The defense carried on with their witnesses, and the first witness they called was a lawyer, Mark Bell, that was very familiar with Alex Murdaugh. He was a law partner of Alex Murdaugh at the Pimphead firm, and he was also a personal friend. And so he had, he's got anyone that works with Alex, given the nature of the 404B, bad crimes, other financial crimes and wrongdoings, testimony coming in throughout the weeks is going to be subject to that kind of examination by the state lawyers. So, I mean, this guy, Mark Ball, he was articulate, he was very personable, he was a good witness, and so Jim Griffin tried to lead him down. What did you see? When did you get the call? He built him up, basically building up, or attempted to build up Alex's character as, being a family man. Basically, he would, annoy Mr. Bell or Ball. Is it Bell or Ball?
Bell, I believe.
Bell of the Ball.
Bell of the Ball.
Bell of the Ball.
We'll just call him Mark, but he would annoy Mark sometimes because, he would take calls from his family during depositions and meetings, and just described him as a family man, but also admittedly, without even being prompted by Creighton Walter, said that, after the financial revelation, I didn't know him the way I thought I knew him. But, he was really used as a witness on the scene to basically describe Alex Murdaugh as being distraught. He was torn to pieces. He was saying, look at what they did, look at what they did.
Well, that was the critical point. That was probably the main point of why they called it.
That was a big point. Why do you think so, Luke?
Well, I mean, the juice isn't exactly worth the squeeze with this witness because they did get to plow into all that financial baggage. But, the state has tried to key in as if Alex Murdaugh had this kind of little confession, which we talked about in our last podcast. I thought was pretty disingenuous because it's him crying to the SLED agent. We've had this debate about whether he says, "I did him so bad," or they did him so bad through his own tears, and the people that know him like his son Buster, and then also this guy say, no. He clearly says they, meaning those assailants, did him so bad, and they also talk about how he's mentioned that even prior to that interview. So I think one of the main points from that witness is to say that Alex Murdaugh was on scene, distraught, saying they did him so bad, and just like chronicling that to really push away from the state's concept. And I was, the state has a lot of powerful, great evidence, but that way they tried to insinuate that as a cheap shot in my mind. You got plenty of good evidence, put it up. Don't try to characterize someone's words. And so that was part of why he came, and also talk about how sloppy the crime scene was, and how he's, like you said, he's pointing out, like, guys, SLED agents, you might want to get that buckshot pellet. And they're like, nah, we're good. Or, hey, there's some skull on the ground there. That seems important. Or you might want to collect it, send it to the pathologist. Nah, we're good. So
yeah, I mean, he did go to the scene the next day. He testified and was able to kind of point out, or at least in his opinion, for the first time, pointing out some of the embedded buckshot pellet that I think was referenced during yesterday's testimony by a defense expert, but he was able to kind of point it out and bring it to the attention of law enforcement. They kind of seemed disinterested, we're good. He also made a point of generally saying that people were allowed to walk through the crime scene. He didn't like the way water was allowed to drip off the metal roof onto Paul's body. He thought that was disrespectful. He had a real high opinion of Paul. Generally, he kept on referring to him as being a good kid. He's a good kid. He was a little bit reckless. He kind of got, and had some immaturity about him, but otherwise was a good kid. He did bring up the point that he was the one that was asking a lot of questions about, what kind of weapons were used, and they were talking about, looks like a 300 blackout, and so he said, well, there's one over here in the gun room, and he did make a point that, or at least it was elicited by the defense, that he had to bring that to law enforcement. Law enforcement had already looked at the gun room and didn't realize they had a matching weapon in terms of caliber of firearm. So generally, sloppy investigation by law enforcement per this lawyer, even though he's not a criminal defense lawyer, he's not a prosecutor. He was also able to build up the credit of Alex Murdaugh in terms of being a family man, but again, Creighton Waters did a really good job. It was to me, it almost felt more of a state witness by the end of his testimony than a defense witness, because he was able to dive back into the financial crimes, the kind of really elicit, you didn't know this guy that you thought was your friend, that you had to dinner, that your children played sports together, went to school together, and you just didn't know him. And he hurt you real bad because you and your other partners had to come out of pocket and pay back all the money he stole to your clients. And so that, he said he was just angry about that. He was really furious about that. And so here's yet again another witness that the defense called, but yet really evokes a lot of betrayal at the hands of Alex Murdaugh. And I would just say, Luke, I know you got some more thoughts on this, but even more than kind of the gratuitous financial crime testimony that Creighton Waters was able to get out of this witness, Mark, the big things for me, and I'll say this again, the big things for me was that he reiterated that Alex Murdaugh lied repeatedly about being at the kennel to Mark, this witness, and also lied to the law partners about being down there. And I think Creighton Waters got this witness to say, and by your count, he lied to you, what, 3 or 4 times about that particular fact? Yeah. And then again, and you didn't know him the way you thought you did you? No, I did not. So that was huge. Another very personally invested, someone that's in the life of Alex Murdaugh being lied to about this really important point. So that was huge. The other big thing for me, Luke, and you can talk a little bit about why this is so important, and a lot of the viewers probably are all over this, but he said that when he got to Moselle, to the big house, he noticed a golf cart on the left side of the house. Luke, talk to people about why that would be so important from the state's perspective.
Yeah, that was kind of a little subtle bombshell that was kind of just put out there, not really fleshed upon. But the reason why it's important is when you look at the timeline and you look at all the GPS data and the step data. So we know that Alex Murdaugh's phone is at the main house while his family is at the kennels. And by this time, it's undisputed that he's at the kennels as well because you had that Snapchat video, even though he lied about it earlier. If he testifies, which he will, he's going to have to do a lot of explaining. But we really got to really dive into the manner of how the parties got down to the kennels. It's pretty clear from Paul, and looking at the timeline that he walked down there. You can see that it's like 283 steps. It's about a third of the mile. It took about 10 minutes. He was on the phone half the time with his buddy about the dog Cash. But you look at Maggie's phone, which will register steps, but not GPS. And I noticed, although they got down there about the same time, her phone only has like 40 some steps or something. And so it basically begs the question, well, she must have walked enough to get on some type of golf cart or ATV and then just drive on down there. Now, did Alec drive down with her? You could certainly opine that husband and wife would drive on down there to catch up with Paul and go see the dogs at the kennels. But afterwards, you know, her phone is registering steps. Again, Alex is not yet. It's up still at the house. So assuming, you know, we can play with it however you want, but if you're the state, the reason why it's important is because you're saying, well, Alec drove down there with his wife, killed them, rounded her phone up enough to register some small steps, I think it's 59 at that point, and then drove it back up to the house in that same golf cart. And really in this trial, you had, and that's why once you're driving, the phone isn't registering the same steps as if you're walking. So at that point, that explains kind of how he gets back to the house in a short amount of time, would have possession of her phone, but so that's good. And the state hadn't really drawn that out yet through this trial. We've seen pictures of side-by-sides and other ATVs in the hangar. But there hasn't, and she does have this kind of alleged tire track on her leg, which people have touched upon, that I think has been testified could be consistent with the ATV, but like perhaps rubbing up on it or bouncing off, who knows? She's not run over per the pathologist. But it's still, so that's great for the state. It shows a way he gets back to the house. Now he's gonna hustle up his stuff, get rid of evidence if that's your perspective, but it still doesn't explain. Her phone goes silent in terms of steps, and then his activates for 283 while he's getting his stuff together at the house, then gets in his Suburban where his phone stops registering steps. So there's still this gap where he's got her phone, she still should be registering steps when his is, unless, the only thing I can think of is if somehow he were just to put her phone in the Suburban, then go handle his business, gather his phone, wash, get rid of his clothes, and then jump back in his truck. But why do that first? I don't know, but there's a gap there that can't really be explained, which is helpful for the defense.
Right. So those are all interesting points of discussion. The last point I'll make, and then we'll move along because we want to leave time for questions at the end. We got some more witnesses to cover. Is that, you know, Mark, this witness as well, you know, Creighton Waters did a good job of pointing out the next day when he went to the scene or again, we're talking about the feed shed where Paul was killed. You know, he's noting, you know, buckshot pellets and window frames, but, you know, Creighton Waters also said, but when you went in there, you got blood on your shirt, didn't you? And also lower on your pants, just walking through that area, and yes, he did. So I would say this point kind of cuts both ways. If you're the state, you're gonna, you know, like I said previously here and in other outlets, you know, if he's bloody, then he's guilty. If he's too clean, then he's guilty. So like, it can be spun however you want to, but Creighton Waters made a good point of saying, when you went in there briefly to kind of look at the scene, just because you're a lawyer and you're curious, you got blood on yourself, did you not? Yes, I did. And so, you know, juxtaposed to Alex Murdaugh, who doesn't have hardly any blood anywhere. So,
so all in all, just a question from somebody on TikTok. Would you say, it kind of sounds like perhaps the defense, but who would you say won with that witness? That was a win for the defense or the state, or is that hard to say?
I think they kind of cancel each other out. Points were made for each side, but I mean, it's good if you care, if a juror, because jurors probably aren't going to hyper-analyze it like we are. We wish they would, but they're just normal folks who aren't even allowed to take notes at this point. But one thing that might have stuck with them was that I did them so bad versus they did them. So that answers that question, which is you don't want that you don't want that to be the topic of discussion in the deliberation room if you're the defense. So you can answer that question, but by answering that question, you gave a lot of credence to the fact that now there's an ATV, which could be the escape vehicle to get back to the house and get rid of her phone without her phone registering steps. So was it worth it? I don't know.
And just my thought on it is he's calling balls and strikes. I mean, he's right down the middle. And I would even say he was probably more effective for the state in cross-examination. I think there's more points coming from him for the state. I mean, every witness, you put him in the category of a financial witness, but he also is a little bit different because he was at Moselle the night of as a personal friend. And again, it's the same narrative. All the financial witnesses liked Alex Murdaugh until he stole from them. And then they had a different opinion of him, but they all kind of generally agreed that they could never imagine him killing his family. And then, the state does a good job of saying, but remember, you just said you didn't really know him, right? Right. So this guy falls in that same category, except he does, confirm that, again, he was lied to by Alex Murdaugh about being at the kennels. We got the golf cart issue, which is he's the first witness to really bring that into play in terms of the golf cart being there to help deal with the steps issue. And then again, he got bloody just going into the crime scene the day after briefly. So I think he's mostly the state kind of had him in their pocket a little bit there, just narrowly. So we got Mr. Morris Cook Jr. I think we can go real quickly with him. I mean, he represented Alex Murdaugh on the boat case, and he was just generally used as a defense lawyer to say we weren't really that concerned with Mark Tinsley getting ready to drop a hammer on us. We weren't concerned about the motion to compel. We didn't need a massive time stall by presumably the state's theory of let me kill my family and put the brakes on things. So if you buy into that motive that the state has, and again, Luke and I as defense lawyers really believe that the motive is not really a motive, it's really a mechanism for the state to call a motive to get in all his lies and the financial crimes to show he's a liar. And guess what? If he gets on the stand, he's going to lie to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. But he was kind of there. He was kind of a nothing burger witness, but just to say we weren't that concerned about the civil case, not enough to do something drastic. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I will confess, when he took the stand, I was listening to him while driving on the road to Aiken, because we had some...
We're doing
Side story.
our own lawyer business?
Right, we don't only listen to other people's cases.
They also have their own cases.
Go to Aiken and deal with my case, and got dismissed, by the way.
All right, good job.
But I did listen to him. It is like you said, they brought him to say, hey, I was part of the defense team. We weren't really worried about his personal exposure under the plaintiff's theory, for the boat wreck. Is it going to be a negligent parenting case, and that the motions to compel certain answers from the defense perspective, sure, they were concerning, but it wasn't some bombshell that he would have to kill his family to distract from. That was the general take.
And on cross by the state, the only thing I thought was really interesting, and I can't even remember who crossed.
I think it was Creighton Waters.
But that's right. But Creighton looked back and said, "Do you see Mark Tinsley in the courtroom?" And so the camera panned to Mark Tinsley, who was on the second or third row. He raised his hand, and so the whole court got to be reminded of how ferocious Mark Tinsley is.
Right. If
they had forgotten, I thought that was pretty interesting. In this trial, we had a lot of identifying people throughout the courtroom for demonstrative purposes. It doesn't normally happen in trials. We've had Buster identified before he testified. We've had various witnesses, so it's.
Yeah.
I think that's a high-end theater by the state.
Mark's still interested. He's still hunting this case down, boy.
He's there. He's there.
So how do a couple people chime in, because everyone's so curious about like the different height that is being brought up about like the shooter and how tall is the shooter, you know, the 5'2" theory that's being floated around. Now people are wondering could the shooter have been on the ATV, but that would have made them potentially taller, correct? I guess I don't know how tall the ATV is. They haven't dove into that.
Well, that's interesting theory. So I guess I'm trying to picture that in my mind. I mean, the testimony was
like
so Sutton from yesterday. He's got this pool of shell casings that generally are going to eject to the right and rear, so we can kind of tell where they are, assuming they're not kicked by a bunch of people coming through the scene. But they're basically grouped around Maggie with the Blackout 300. So then he's got his kind of radius, which he said was 12 feet. He then goes and extrapolates beyond what SLED did using physics by taking those trajectories out to show around where the shooter would have been based on the casings. Well, what is the barrel of the gun? How is it being held at what level? So based on those measurements, he was able to say, well, I'm measuring Alex Murdaugh. He'd have to, if he's standing, he'd have to be holding it basically below his knees. These figures he put in, to comfortably at least hold it kind of somewhat realistically at your hip, 5'2" to 5'4". But I guess if you're sitting, I guess that is more realistic if you just.
Well, most golf courses also have, a built-up front area. A lot of them have a shielding here. So more likely than not, if it was that golf cart, he'd have to be turned sideways in a sitting position.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the shooting for Paul had already occurred. Per pathologist, per kind of logic, he's shot while in the feed room. If Maggie had been shot first, he wouldn't just be only then getting out of the feed room after 6 shots. He'd be running or dealing with the assailant. So Paul, we can agree that Paul was shot first, but you have to be like, again, it's a very low shotgun blast on the kill shot, almost to the point where a regular hunting shotgun is almost with the butt to the ground. So that's a great question. I guess you could hypothetically have a blackout and a shotgun on your cart, shoot Paul in a strange way, and then throw into a different weapon and run over to Maggie. But I just don't.
Well, then you'd have to be driving your golf cart while simultaneously holding multiple firearms of different make and model and caliber, and not missing, and
a couple of those shots on Maggie are less than 3 feet, so that just the bulk of a golf cart would make that hard to do.
And that's due to the stippling. Yeah, that's right. So seems unlikely.
That's a great thought. Commentary, way to think out of the box.
Good question.
Great question.
But our first impression is not probably that.
And we're not seeing a bunch of very highly identifiable tracks in that area that they really have linked to that. So interesting thought, but probably unlikely.
All right.
That would move us on to then Kenneth Xerxes?
Yeah, Kenneth need to go back to Connecticut. Luke and I are big fans of intelligent expert witnesses. On complicated crime scenes, we normally try to get a crime scene expert. And so Kenneth here has been doing this a long time. The defense qualified him as an expert in fingerprint analysis, footprint analysis, and crime scene examination. And Dick Karputlian directed his examination, and basically he was there to say, I've been doing this a long time, I've got lots of qualifications, and SLED and local Colleton County Sheriff's Department do not have the ability to to test things the way I would. Certainly they have the ability to preserve evidence, and he's just saying they didn't do that. He's saying they didn't, They walked into a bloody feed room. He said he would have built a 2x4 bridge over that to preserve any footprints, to not be, walking through bloody places. He would have done testing of the blood and not just assumed it was all from Paul, the victim. No fingerprint dusting was performed on the entryways of the feed room. He was really, really critical of the photographs of the shoe prints because at the angle they were taken, they were not in a way where Special Agent Worley could compare them with identifiable traits to really get a good match on other available foot sources. And so, but he was also, I didn't like the way he presented himself. There's plenty of experts that are smart. I found him to not be trying to hide the ball. He just wasn't very confident. My take on him is, and we've talked to a lot of experts like this, that they are past their prime, they live comfortable lives, they're cuddled up with their blankets around them at night, and they've got a nice wealth of knowledge, but they're not really courtroom ready. He wasn't. He seemed nervous just talking to Dick Harpootlian, and that was his own, Dick called him as his own expert. So, and, John Metters did a good job with him, basically on a couple different fronts, basically, got his rate out, which, is common, $3.50 an hour, this kind of that. That rings hollow to us, but basically said, well, but you agree that with the tools that they had at their disposal, they did the best they could. And he kind of generally agreed, and they tried hard and this and that. And people make mistakes, and I think John Metters got Kenneth Zerchi to even admit that he made a mistake just reading something on the stand. That's good experience, prosecutor, catching somebody, being on their feet, cross-examining someone, so John's going to be great with that. And the other good thing that he kind of got out was that Dick Harpootlian had him not write a report, which is interesting because if you do have an expert report and you intend to use it, you got to turn it over to the other side. So this is an expert that didn't do a report, but was just kind of critiquing, or as John said, Monday morning quarterbacking, second guessing.
Which is what we're doing right now.
What we're doing right now. Second guessing SLED's work and Colleton County's work. And then the kind of extra special moment John Metters had with this witness, this expert witness, was that got him to kind of admit that he had generated at least 2 PowerPoint presentations, but they only had one that was being used in court. And that doesn't really mean anything to people that do this all the time. It could have been something that wasn't really relevant. It could have been something that wasn't intended for court use. It was just like a mock-up of an idea. But John Metters did a good job of saying, where's that? And this witness just said, well, I gave it to him, I don't know where it is. So it kind of has a little bit of suspicion about, in front of the jury, casting aspersion that you're hiding information, which Metters has been doing a couple of times throughout the trial with some of the defense witnesses. Luke, how did you feel about this witness?
Basically, I agree with you mostly. He just seemed kind of deflated. He's an older gentleman, which is nothing wrong with that. Some of our best experts are up in years, but he's clearly qualified in these areas. And the point of what he came in, his opinion was essentially they could have done better. They had all these techniques that they failed to use to find things like fingerprints or proper shoe impressions, because the goal is to systematically assess and preserve the scene to find evidence of who the killer is. And he's basically showing that they missed these opportunities, but then when he's confronted with that, he's not very rigorous in his own assessment of that. So, if you're gonna go out there and say SLED didn't do a good job, then, stand by your opinion of that. Don't kind of equivocate and be like, well, basically, they did as good as they could. You don't want that in an expert, and you're going out there on a limb. And based on what he's saying, it sounds like SLED did miss a lot of things they could have done. So stand by that if that's your opinion. He's clearly an expert. And then, it just showed kind of more of the defense theme, and that is all about reasonable doubt. You want to plant that seed and kind of start to get the jury frustrated with SLED's concept of putting Alex Murdaugh in the circle of suspicion. And essentially, Alec has to get himself out in SLED's view, but they didn't really do their own job properly to try to find evidence that could help identify who really should be, or whether, they found Murdaugh's fingerprint on the door right then and there next to a chunk of brain. Well, that might, sure, he'd explain it, but that could help their case. Or if they 100% identified a tread mark that matched his Sperry's, that might really help the case, especially when he said he wasn't down there that day. So stuff like that, it's planting the seed for sloppy work. The defense can say at the end of the day, should allow a jury to continue to question the decision-making of law enforcement to charge and believe that Murdaugh did this when they could have done other things to find potential evidence. That's really what that comes down to.
Yeah, and John Meadors was brought on to the Attorney General's office, I think it was like a month or two, maybe even before this trial, and it's for a reason. John Meadors is a very experienced trial attorney. We've had our own trials and tribulations with him, but he's savvy, he's a good prosecutor. So here's, I don't spend my days patting prosecutors on the back, but what was clear to me was that, the first question out of the gate from John Meadors, to really display in front of the jury, how this expert didn't review everything, and if, he said, so you agree with what Miss, I can't remember if it was like Rutland or Rudolph said about this case, right? And this guy, Kenneth Zersey, goes, who? And so if he had tried to play like he knew what John Meadors was talking about, John Meadors would have busted him and said, well, wait a second, you didn't review her material. You don't know that she's the agent that did X, Y, Z. So he was honest at least and said, well, I don't know who that is. And John Meadors says, exactly, you don't know because you didn't look through the entire file. You didn't get the entire case jacket. How can you give an opinion on, how can you Monday morning quarterback the best of the best in South Carolina without reading the entire case jacket? And so that was a great kind of pitfall question that Meadors kind of blew this guy right out of the water with. That's why he's here, And so as much as I think Meadors has been part of the theatrical aspect from the state, and sometimes he can get a little overboard, I thought that was a great way to just blast this expert right out of the water. So I think if we're rating how this expert went, I think he's been the worst. I think he was one of the worst experts that's been up so far. Dick Carpuglia made the point through him that, things could have been done better. We could have maybe found more evidence if things were done the right way. But he came across as, very kind of weak and timid, and was generally made to look like a Northeastern retired expert that has come down to, call out SLED, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. So right. I just would put him as a win for the state, which is not good when you're paying an expert $3.50 an hour.
We've got a few people talking about the sound. Is sound good or bad for you? I hear some people say that there's an echo. We can maybe try to move the camera around. But while we kind of get some feedback on that, people have been asking, Meadors, would you say that his tone and demeanor resonates well with jurors? That maybe he was coming off as rude or unlikable? Does that really weigh heavily, you think, for a jury?
I think they need Meadors in this case due to his murder experience, and we go way back with Meadors, and I don't think I wouldn't be concerned if you saw this podcast, but he knows he's known for a little bit of drama, a little flick. And so it can be very helpful to lure a jury in to be convincing, because a lot of this case, whether it's right or wrong, has been about financial crimes, and then you get Creighton Waters and John Conrad and other really financial crime related attorney generals going up there. It kind of loses a little razzle dazzle. So when Meadows gets up, I guarantee you, I'd bet $100 he's going to do the closing. But when Meadows gets up, you know you're going to have a little more razzle dazzle, a little more drama, maybe a fight with Harpootlian over there. But he is definitely honed that skill, doing major cases. So the only way it won't really be effective is if it's drama in a space that doesn't really call for drama or kind of emotion.
Yeah.
And then you might kind of wonder, well, why is it happening right now? But usually he's pretty good about knowing when to spice it up and when to spice less.
To add flair.
I mean, I think his personal, and again, he's on his toes in court. He's sharp. He's experienced. I think the international audience may not be as receptive to his style, but I guarantee you that this jury is much more in tune with his style than the international audience. And you know, if he's doing the closing, he'll get up there and tell you that he's the son of a preacher, and he is. So he'll give some folksy charm in his closing that he'll try to really endear himself and relate to the jurors.
And the national and international audience probably views him as very similar to the prosecutor and My Cousin Vinny. Which is a compliment, I would say.
John, if you're watching, it's a compliment.
If you're doing a double murder in small town, rural, coastal South Carolina, that's a compliment.
Do we want to move on to Barbara?
Oh, Barbara was great.
Barbara was great.
Love Barbara.
So
Yeah.
Barbara Mixon is a no-nonsense, straight shooting caretaker. Daytime caretaker of
40 plus years.
of Alex Murdaugh's parents. And so you get to really position her testimony straight up against another very light witness for the state, Shelley Smith. Because Shelley was the nighttime caretaker, and then Miss Mixon was the daytime caretaker. So there's a lot of people are going to be comparing their testimony throughout this trial to see who's more credible.
Relieve Shelley at 5 to 8.
That's right.
She knows exactly 5 to 8. Relieve
Which is going to really make tomorrow's transition interesting.
Right.
We'll talk about that, but
We'll
I'll let you dissect the testimony.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that.
We can think about the handoff of Miss Libby's care tomorrow based on some contradictory.
So obviously the big point of putting her up is, she loves Alex Murdaugh like one of her own. She's like one of, how do you know him well? Do I know my children? Yeah, of course I know him. So he's like a son to her. She clearly thinks highly of him. The big point for her, two major points, but the big point for Miss Mixon that was extrapolated from the defense is that the reason Alex came to his mom's house that night is because Barbara Mixon called him up and said, "Listen, Alex, your mom is very agitated due to the fact that your father had to go to the hospital. Please come see her. I can't get her to calm down. She won't eat anything. Mm-hmm. Please check on her tonight."
And that justifies him driving there at an abnormal hour.
And they then...
And maybe a high rate of speed.
And they showed her a phone record that that was her call to him. So, what that does is it gives the state an opportunity to say, this is what he did. He visited frequently. He gives the defense the ability to say he not only did he visit them frequently, but that day in particular, he got the call from the daytime caretaker to help calm down your mama, please come. And so instead of a false alibi narrative, you've got a real, genuine visitation. So she would be a huge witness to talk about that story other than Alex himself.
And the whole reason for him going was to take like a horse pill, right? Like it was like a pill that she didn't want to take. Or did I misunderstand something that was said?
Maybe.
It was like to take medicine, which would take not a super long time, right?
Maybe I missed that part.
Okay.
But could have
You
been.
guys do have other things to do during the
Well,
Yeah.
I might have been on the phone at that point, but
The bottom line is she put the call in to Alex to come see Mama.
because remember in the state's opening, they said that this drive to Alameda after the killings was a manufactured alibi for the sole purpose of trying to get away digitally through your phone, make calls, put yourself somewhere else, and then pretend that you're coming home to find your slain family. So, like you said, Brian, this 100% says that this woman who's been taking care of her family, his family for 40 years said, get over here, your mom's agitated because Handsome is in the hospital. And she also talked about a call she got from Maggie, where Maggie was like, look, I'm coming in, I'm cooking you dinner tonight, I'm gonna be around for a few days. And she also, what will make for an interesting pass off tomorrow morning at 5 till 8 is the fact that she unequivocally said, I've never seen any blue tarp. I was there the days when they're talking about the blue tarp coming in and being spread out.
No blue tarp laying out over a piece of
I didn't see
furniture.
any blue tarp. I ain't never seen no blue tarp. And so that just...
Can y'all kind of explain like what you're talking about for anybody that may not be connecting the prosecution's witness versus the blue tarp discussion now with Barbara?
Well, most of the folks that were following Shelley Smith, we had this whole blue tarp versus raincoat. The state's trying to say that something blue and vinyl was used to scurry away perhaps weapons to hide it after the fact by Alex Murdaugh. He brought that in, one day early the following week after the funeral of his father. And there's been a big debate, and Miss Smith really did identify seeing something blue. She called it a tarp. It was spread out over a chair. Later, they would find a blue raincoat, not a tarp, and find a bunch of gunshot residue on the inside of it. No DNA, no blood, but gunshot residue. And the state wants to go, aha, there were guns in that. But Miss Nixon from today just says, I was there. I didn't see anything blue spread out over anything. And I think tomorrow, with all the attention on this, and of course you had Miss Shelley had a GoFundMe, she made a bunch of money.
Well, I think her daughter set that up.
Her daughter set it up, and that was a lot of controversy. And then Miss Mixon, for all I know, she's got a GoFundMe right now, but she wasn't emotionally pained going through this as much as Shelley was. But they're totally disagreeing with each other about the blue tarp. So when she goes at 5 till 8 tomorrow to relieve Miss Shelley, there could be some words or some cold stares due to them being pitted against each other on this high-profile case.
So yeah, very unique case.
Very brave one.
Double murder where we still have two caregivers for Alex Murdaugh's mother, both testifying. One for the state, one for the defense.
One night shift, one day shift.
I mean, it's very, very fascinating here. And I will, since I've been on a roll talking about John Metters, I'll just give him some credit. Typically on a witness where you can't really do a whole lot with, you'll want to talk about, well, we interviewed you previously, you never mentioned that, and how many times have you met with the defense or the state to prepare your testimony? And John did a good job of that and just said, listen, we interviewed you. I personally interviewed you, and that's a good trial lawyer technique to really get the witness locked in. I'm calling you on it. We talked about this 2 weeks ago, and you didn't talk about that with me, did you? No, I didn't. And she didn't try to say, yeah, I did. She just said, nope, I did not. And when'd you come up with that? When did you just remember that? Well, I can't say exactly when I said that for the first time. And Metters said, it wasn't with me when we spoke about this. No, it was not. So, once again, Metters did a good job as a talented and experienced prosecutor to kind of flesh out that in front of the jury. But she was a great witness, Miss Mixon, for the defense.
He got in and got out and didn't try to
He did.
convince her one way or the other about a blue tarp, because that would be a losing battle, and he could tell that.
Yeah, and he would lose credibility with the jury if he tried to rip her apart on the stand, because she was a very likable woman. Anything else from anybody on Miss Mixon?
Let's see. Just that we were a little far away. We look better the further away it is. So.
Yeah, at least I do.
No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if you guys want to answer this, but people do want to know if you all think Alex Murdaugh is guilty or not.
So that's hard for us because
I'll preface this by saying, too, a few questions have been asked, like, is this pro Murdaugh or pro this or that? And this is generally unbiased. However, the Sheelys are defense attorneys, so naturally viewing cases through a lens of defense.
Well, we are unbiased, but yet we are, we see.
Unbiased.
All right, well, I'm unbiased. Luke can be biased.
I'm biased, but
good twin, bad twin.
it's just part of what I do for a living, but I can see what the other side is proving and the strengths of the case. But yeah, I'm biased. I can admit my bias.
I will try not to admit my bias. What I'll say is, our personal experience as criminal defense lawyers in South Carolina, and we started our careers representing indigent clients. And so, we've been in private practice for over a decade now, and we get hired to represent people on all kinds of charges, but including double murder cases. And I've seen the system spend a lot of time, money, and energy and take bad evidence and get wrongful convictions. I've seen a bunch of bad stuff. And so, our system is only as good as the most zealous advocates allow it to be. So even if someone is guilty as homemade sin, you still want the defense, whoever that may be, representing in a very zealous, powerful way. Because if you lay down for the high-profile cases or the people that appear certainly to be guilty, if you just lay down as a defense lawyer, then the people that are truly innocent are going to get run over, because the system will just get accustomed to zero resistance from the defense. And we can't have that in our American justice system. So I am unbiased. I try to think about this fair and impartially. I try to think about motive, even though that's not an element of murder in South Carolina. It doesn't make sense. However, all the lies that Alex Murdaugh has told make it seem like he's got a whole bunch to hide. By the way, if Luke and I represented Alex Murdaugh, he never would have given a statement.
That was another question.
Never would have given a statement.
What you all would have done differently
and that's not because we think innocent people should talk to law enforcement and guilty people should not. It's simply because when someone is killed in an unjustified way, law enforcement will do whatever it takes to try to get inconsistent statements. We heard some testimony on the stand from the lead SLED agent about he was using trickery, and they are allowed to lie to suspects under the law. They're allowed to deceive, to use any tactics necessary. They get a lot of advanced training and interrogation techniques. There's something called the READ technique. You can Google that, look it up. It talks about REID technique. They get a lot of advanced training. So I've seen the system crush people, innocent people, and I would, here's the last thing I'll say about this. I would rather have, and I think I speak for my brother too, 1,000 guilty men go free than see one innocent man get wrongfully convicted, because that's the way our system is set up. So I think Alex Murdaugh's got a lot of problems in this case, but I'm still holding out judgment. I personally think the state may get a conviction. I think if they do, a lot of the financial crimes that come into this case may cause it to come back on appeal, which no one wants to think about that, because in 5 years or 4 years when this would come back on appeal, people will be thinking about other things. And so we all kind of live in the moment. But Luke thinks may know something about this, but didn't do the thing, right?
I'm still making up my mind. I say I'm biased because I feel like you. I tend to gravitate towards the underdog. I've never been a prosecutor. and I tend to probably put more weight in a good thing for the defense in this case than I might in the state's case, because I'm always in my own line of work thinking that way, that it's not all doom and gloom. So I get excited about good things for the defense, but I can also see how something like, ooh, the golf cart was up at the house. Yeah, I saw that. I can think how critical and how good that can be for the state. But I don't know. I think he's got so much explaining to do that half of their circumstantial case just comes from his own lie of claiming to not be down there when a Snapchat video through his voice puts him there. And it's just snowball. And so if SLED already has you in that circle of suspicion, you're toast once they realize that. But now he's got to take the stand, and the only way he gets out is if he takes a stand and gives a credible, believable, heartfelt explanation, owning up to his lies, but explaining why. I think, honestly, some of the forensic evidence about the height of a shooter makes it seem it's difficult to understand how a 6'4" guy could have done that in a generally reasonable position. I'm not saying he couldn't have crawled in like a Marine under some barbed wire and got the right shot. And but we're talking about the testimony was what's most likely. And based on that $500,000 to Cousin Eddie, that is not for pills. I think he was in over his head. The question is, can he convince a jury? Is it even the truth? He might be able to convince a jury, but it's not the truth. But if it isn't the truth, he's better able to convince a jury. If there's some other criminal element or some gang that he got in over his head with, an Ozark type theory that we've talked about that was proving a point to him and waiting for him to get out of there just so they could slay his family right in his backyard. There's some independent evidence about the crime scene that certainly suggests two shooters, shorter shooters, multiple weapons. And then you've got just this picture of a kind of a loving family, that there wasn't a rift. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn. I can see both sides, but he's going down unless he can testify credibly to something like that.
Yeah, I'll withhold judgment about whether I think he did it or not when he testifies. Mm-hmm. Right now, I guess I would say he's got a lot of explaining to do. But there's some, Luke and I get, because, to convict, you got to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And so defense lawyers all day long are trying to look for reasonable doubt in cases. And, everyone's got baked in opinions on this, but all they need is one of those jurors to say, I have a reasonable doubt for this thing to hang. So they don't even need, unanimous kind of reasonable doubt situation for him not to be found guilty. It's just one juror.
And by the way, a teaser, the defense last witness today, amongst other things, laid a nugget for a short shooter.
Listen, and we can talk about that. Are there any more other questions, or we want to?
A lot of people want to know, will he take the stand? Would you, if you were representing him, make him take the stand? It sounds like you would strongly.
It's the only way out. It's the only way out.
It sounds like you would strongly.
It's the only way out. It's the only way out. If he doesn't take the stand,
Luke and I would, if we were representing him, we would be having him take the stand. It's his decision.
And it takes weeks of preparation.
It's his decision to waive his right to remain silent and to give testimony, but there's so many lies in this case, and even his own voice in a recording from rehab admitting to being a liar concerning the roadside shooting. He's got to testify to combat that, or else they're going to play him imagine this. The defense is poking holes and they're doing this and that, but in evidence is a recording of him saying, I'm a liar. I'm so sorry. I did everybody wrong. I lied about this suicide attempt. Bless you. And so, imagine him not testifying in this trial, and then John Metters or Creighton Waters pushing his own voice admitting to being a liar, and then just harping on that. Right. Oh my gosh. So I know, the defense got up today outside of the presence of the jury and said, listen, Judge, we're looking for a ruling in advance as we contemplate his testimony to try to shield him from being able to be cross-examined on his financial crimes that you have allowed in. And we're looking for some guidance on that. And, Cliff Newman says, no, cross-examination is cross-examination. And so that they bring that up to, they're trying to always build a record for an appeal. They're trying to preserve an issue. And that's one thing that good trial lawyers do, that it's not all razzle-dazzle on the witness stand or, cross-examining a witness or talking to the jurors. It's also preserving the record. So it was clear that they're trying to show that they're kind of cornered on not being allowed to limit cross-examination. Luke and I always hate it when cross-examination is limited in any way. We love a free-flowing cross-examination. But yeah, they're going to have to wrestle with that. But if it were Luke and my client, if we were representing Alex Murdaugh, we would be strongly encouraging him that the only way he has a chance at being acquitted on the murders is to testify and explain to the jury what he's about. And it seems very likely that he's going to be convicted on multiple counts of financial crimes in another trial setting. I'm sure he'll probably end up pleading guilty to those. The fact that the state was able to bring those into the double murder case, we talk about the financial crimes so much. We talked about those as much as the murders. And so it kind of feels like it's all one thing, but he's not on trial for the financial crimes right now. So I think he's going to have to kind of sacrifice on the financial side of it. He's already kind of incriminated himself in multiple different ways on that front. He'll sacrifice himself to testify to then try to save himself on the family murders. Last witness today, Micah Sturgis. Hannah, you're familiar with, what company did he work for?
Yeah, he worked, I guess he currently works for Barefoot Investigations in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where my mom used to be a private investigator.
Whoa.
So that was really cool. My ears perked up when I heard that. Really neat. But I thought he was, I know I'm a little biased. I thought he was a great witness. Had a lot of experience, obviously lots of thorough trainings that kind of credit him for what he presented today with the self-evidence.
Yeah, and I'm going to let Luke talk about, I think, what Luke is really excited to talk about, but I'll just briefly say that he was a more relatable witness than the older Kenneth Zerchi. He had more energy. He just generally was more relatable, I think, to most people on the jury. He seemed to be very knowledgeable. He had done a lot of this kind of work. One thing I'll say is a big kind of point score for the defense was, we're all interested in steps. We're interested in phone orientation, and we're really interested in GPS data. And, it's clear from Paul's phone and Alex Murdaugh's phone that there's a lot of GPS data available that's been very helpful for everyone to kind of see where they were going. But Maggie's phone did not have this GPS data available. And so, this digital forensic expert is what he was qualified as an expert in. He basically opined that her phone was GPS data capable, and it actually was able to show some data from June 9th in the SLED lab a couple days after the slayings. But due to the way that it was improperly secured in a Faro bag, which is a technical secure term for evidence preservation, is a bag that a digital forensic expert would use to preserve this kind of data. But basically the way it was secured allowed that data to not be stored properly. And so, it's kind of along the lines of the older expert, if things aren't preserved the right way, we can't get things out of it. But he kind of was able to have an opinion that was at the hands of SLED or local law enforcement on how they did not properly handle Maggie's phone, so we could never know about where her GPS location data. But Luke, you want to talk about the big aha moment with them?
There's a couple of good aha moments. So if you've been following the trial, which everybody who's watching has, the state's obvious theory through cell phone data, calls, GPS data, OnStar data, is that after the killings, Alex Murdaugh, they know when his car cranks up. Roughly, he's driving at 9:06, but he's texting his wife saying, "Hey, I'm gonna check on my mom." He then calls a little later at 9:06, and he's buzzing up the road. And their belief is that he just slows down enough to toss the phone out the window and keeps driving on his fake alibi. So what this witness did was he really hyper-analyzed kind of this data in a way that even I think Rudowski didn't quite do regarding where certain information is coming from. And so he looks at that OnStar data, which shows the position of Murdaugh's car, and puts it right at the position where Maggie's phone was found on the road and says, well, that is at 9:08. He gave the position of it, the time, 9:08 driving by the first time, and then gives the time driving back. And he says, well, at that time, Maggie's phone was black light. There was no activity like a backlight when it would come on if you're looking at it or if you're getting a call. Because the state's theory is that Alec is manufacturing this alibi and kind of holding hers in one hand and calling it, and then it's rotating as he calls it, and then he checks it. So it's been blacklighted for a while at that point. It's when he calls at 9:06 and some change, this expert puts him in the driveway still. He's calling Maggie. But that phone does rotate at that point, and someone pushes a side button to silence it. So it's not even at the point where he'd be up the road hypothetically ditching it. So it lends itself to some other assailant who has the phone and that Alec is actually calling it and has already thrown it out the window. So by the time he gets to that position where the phone is, it's gone black. The screen is black. It's not being used anymore or even manipulated anymore. And they talked about that being kind of raised to wake activity. Like if you pick up your phone, it turns on. I found that very interesting. He kind of hyper-analyzed, so that's a big thing for the defense, score for the defense. He hyper-analyzed the steps of Maggie's phone. And it's very interesting because he's looking at her movement a similar distance. He had this chart. And there's a couple of times where she basically, on two different occasions, it was like essentially the movement that may have got her down to the kennels and the movement of the assailant with her phone on the way back. It's about 31 yards or meters of movement, but you had a different step ratio. You had a lot more steps, 59 steps, on the second time after she was dead than you did before. There's about 16 more steps, whatever the number was before. And Phil Barber said, well, what's the significance of that? He goes, well, she's moving literally exactly the same amount in terms of distance, but there's a lot more steps. So what does that mean? The person that had her phone afterwards is taking shorter steps. Oh no, it's the short shooter buy-in. So hypothetically, if you've got a short shooter, maybe 5'2" to 5'4", as Mr. Sutton described the shooter would have to be based on trajectory, that would be consistent with short. Because Maggie, based on her pictures, and I think the pathologist testified, she's a fairly tall woman, maybe 5'8", 5'9", something like that. So you've got shorter steps being taken after she's dead for holding her phone, traveling about the same distance. So
that's crazy.
More steps for a shorter stride. Certainly if Murdaugh had her phone at 6'3", 6'4", you'd be having fewer steps and a longer stride. So that's a fascinating little nugget that dropped out there. And again, I love science, I love math. I'm not particularly good at math, but math like this, I can do. I like logic, because logic doesn't have bias. Logic doesn't lie, it just logics.
People are wondering how tall Cousin Eddie is. Do we know?
You know, it's interesting. I looked him up in the Lexington County Detention Center where he is in secure custody status. You know, some of these jail websites will show some identifying information about height, and it did not list his height. But I was thinking about that a couple days ago. So we need to kind of get some of those internet sleuths out there and
can do it.
try to figure out how tall he is. I'm sure someone can find some record of information with his height. He doesn't.
If Cousin Eddie's 5'2", it's just that would just blow everything.
We need to know how tall Blanca is.
No.
So everybody's sexist. People assume this is a man or a combination of men, but if you're 5'2", 5'4", that's like most of your female population. So just a little food for thought out there.
Just dangling crumbs of thought for everyone to think about. What else we got?
So I guess that gets us through. Do we want to just take live questions now for a little bit?
I think we've got about another 5 minutes left.
Okay, awesome. Drop any questions that you have on the TikTok chat here, and we'll pull some to answer. If we haven't answered any of your questions that you still have, go ahead and ask again because I may have missed them. Let's see.
Is your mom done with the private investigation?
You know, she is. She kind of went back to it like part-time, or I guess just like kind of taking a case here and there for a while, like once my brother and I were in high school and college, but that was kind of short-lived. But she was a badass and continues to be a badass. She has great stories. Maybe we'll bring her on for the accused.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
It would be great.
She'd be a special guest. People want to know, why did Alex delete his phone? And you know, I mean, that's probably something that he's going to have to explain to. I didn't even know that happened.
Yeah, and they were able to look at calls that he had made to Maggie and compare her phone records to his, for instance, and determined that he had deleted some calls to her. So,
well, not just her.
To many people. Yeah.
Right. During that time frame, not to cut you off, you know.
No, that's fine. I mean, I was going to get to that, but yeah, he is. You know, along the same line of, well, why did he lie to so many people while being at the kennel that time frame? Why is he trying to clean up his phone?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's another great reason why he needs to testify to explain himself. And again, he would have to kind of give up a lot of his rights on the financial crimes cases in order to gain credibility in front of this jury on the big fish to fry, the double murder case.
It's really, it's strange because a lot of the calls he deleted, they pieced together from other people's phones. A lot of those communications were fairly nothing burgers, you know, calls after the fact, calls on the road to Alameda. So on the one hand, if you just killed your family, maybe you are just deleting anything that you think might bite you. But on the other hand, if you are panicky and you're a former prosecutor and you know you're probably suspect number one, which you weren't wrong about that, maybe you just panicking and think you need to get rid of some stuff just to try to make sure SLED doesn't look at you hard. But of course, those actions did not work.
Kind of jumping around here. Who, in y'all's opinion, has been the strongest witness so far? And I guess maybe for both the state and defense.
Well, I'll speak for the state, and Luke, you can maybe talk about the defense. But for the state, I would say, obviously the timeline witness was able to be independently compelling and strong because he's taken all this data, and he was their last witness for the state, and bringing it all together. But I'm not going to include it. I like to talk about witnesses that can really hold their own. And I think the strongest witness for the state was going to be Deputy, the expert Kinsley, who was so charismatic, so intelligent, and really did just a great job for the state as one of their major expert witnesses. I was most impressed with him from a state perspective.
For the defense, I would say expert Sutton yesterday. I mean, anytime you can, through math and physics, try to establish that the defendant is physically incapable of being the shooter based on SLED's analysis and data collection, that's a good thing. And that's basically what he did. Now we've got the whole world kind of erupting and wondering about shooting from a golf cart or shooting in military style, but like, he established that from a normal shooting position of a person who's shooting around those shell casings, you have to be a much shorter shooter to have any kind of normal shooting stance based on that trajectory. And he's using SLED's data. So that's a great thing for the defense. Now, whether that gets ignored or pushed back on, but I love some kind of objective approach that establishes something, which they have. And he also, from a personal perspective, was fairly unflappable. Clearly presented what he did well. He took a lot of heat from Attorney General Fernandez. He never really lost his cool. He was able to kind of push back in a way that a lot of the other experts didn't, particularly as we criticized the crime scene guy today. Sutton really held his own on the work he did, and so I think he was the best witness for the defense.
And we kind of given some shout outs to the experts. In terms of lay witnesses, fact witnesses, I really appreciated both Shelley Smith and Barbara Mixon's testimony. Interestingly enough, they're both caregivers for Alex's mom, but they both, like Lou said, the handoff tomorrow is going to be
interesting.
Is going to be very interesting. I would love to be a fly on the wall for that.
Comment who you think is going to win, AM or PM. Just kidding, don't do that.
We got a poll later.
Yeah, we'll post a poll. I know we're running kind of short on time. These two actually have another podcast to be guests on. It's called Surviving the
Survivor. Yeah,
Surviving the Survivor. So, and again, discussing more Murdaugh. So you can catch more there, and we'll go live again soon. You'll be notified via Instagram or TikTok. Any other last thoughts? Have you guys seen the Brandy Churchwell timeline on the Google Sheets where it outlines every single?
I saw that when she first put that out. Mm-hmm. She's getting a huge amount of traction and attention on that, which is very cool. And she's certainly biased.
Yeah.
But is a very smart person who's created a phenomenal timeline.
Right. No, it is. And I thought some of those calls at the end were interesting, but maybe we'll pick up on those another time.
Maybe we'll spend a podcast trying to debunk her.
Yeah. We'll have the timeline as the green screen in the back, and we'll just go through each thing. Awesome. Well, I think that's it for episode 3 of The Accused. Thank you all for tuning in live. Can't wait for next time. And yeah, feel free to ask us any more questions by commenting on any of our current videos. You can check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and obviously TikTok. Thanks. I'll look it up and turn it off. We're still going. This is going to show up on my cell phone evidence if I